Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
I'm Sylvia Earle, oceanographer, National Geographic explorer, founder of Mission Blue, and an ocean elder. Thank you, ocean elders, for sponsoring this program.
Absolutely. And this is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community from around the world on topics of wonder and interest. And as we go through, please put your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can towards the end of the program. And before we get going here, we want to remind everyone that
the world is, after all, it's
blue.
Never forget.
And today we're so grateful and honored to have our friend Carl Safina back again to join us. Carl is an ecologist and author focused on human relationships with animals and the natural world. And he's been on some expeditions with us, with Sylvia to the Arctic and with both of us to the Solomon Islands. So welcome, Carl. It's great to have you back.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. It's always great to even just see your face and hear your voice. So for me, it's a great evening already.
That's awesome. Well, here in our home library, we have like the Safina shelf.
Oh,
and
yes.
and
where to start?
Where to start? She's just going to pass them all.
Yeah.
Oh my God! But we've got a new book adding to the.
Wait.
You're making me feel very productive. Thank you.
But we have a new book to add. Oh my Lord! Hold that up again. Alfie and Me.
Alfie and I. How are you using?
Oh my God! Don't start with the grammar corrections now. So Carl, you're going to share your slides today for us, correct?
Yes.
So when you're ready, you can share your screen and let's talk.
Okay. I will do that.
We're going to dive in and talk about how.
Great. I should say that the subtitle of the book is as important as the title. It's what owls know and what humans believe. And so it has a lot to do with how people have seen their place in the world and how this little owl brought me much closer to understanding, really wild lives, individuality among wild animals and things like that. And then asking a big question, which I'll get to as soon as I get through some of these slides. So this is, you should see this now. Are you seeing the cover of the book?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. So we tend to live very disconnected from the natural world. And this is a story about connection. A few years ago, I got a text with this photo saying, "Do you know what kind of bird this is?" And it was from a wildlife rehabilitator who was a friend of mine. And this little baby bird was so messed up and so near death that it wasn't even obvious what this was.
Wow.
But I looked at it, looked at the feet, looked at the beak, and said, well, this has to be an owl. And from the size, it has to be a screech owl. It's way, way, way far away from fledging age. Something dragged it out of its nest and dropped it somewhere on a lawn, and somebody found it this way. So the rehabber did an excellent job of cleaning this bird, and I suggested some ways of warming the bird up, and it worked really well. And this little owl started to really come back to life and then began to thrive. And I thought that we were going to do a soft release at my home. So the rehabber had also been pet sitting for us while we were away. Owl was here, and then the rehabber had to go overseas. And I said, okay, just leave the owl. We'll do the soft release. Soft release is like what happens when a young bird leaves the nest. It leaves the nest in familiar territory. Usually its parents are there caring for it. For owls, the parents would be there for 2 or 3 weeks. We were going to take the part of the parents as the little owl, basically found her footing in the world and found her wings and eventually wandered off, which is what they normally do. But she had a flight delay. Sylvia knows a lot about flight delays, but this was an owly flight delay. Her long feathers that let them actually fly did not come in at the right time. And so I wound up holding on to her much longer than I thought I would. That was in the original plan. I wanted to make sure she could molt correctly, all the feathers would grow correctly, because when I was a wildlife rehabber, I had seen this problem where a near-death young owl never got the feathering properly and could never be released. So,
Yeah.
so in that time, this bird, whom we called Alfie, and I started to develop quite a little relationship, along with my wife, Patricia. And eventually she did molt. She molted perfectly and looked like she was just absolutely stunning. I could hardly take my eyes off of her. And at that point, I started getting her in shape for eventual release. I used to be a falconer, and I used to train some of these birds, so I knew how to do a lot of these things.
Well, you and birds go way back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we go way back. Do you remember the time that snowy owl got loose inside the Waldorf Astoria
Oh
I
yeah.
do.
That was
Oh, my
insane.
goodness.
and
Explore-
wound up on the floor? And I just walked over and picked that bird up.
Yeah.
Everybody else was running in all different directions.
I know, like freaking out, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Ow, it's all right."
Anyway, so I have a long history with birds like this. And one thing about young owls, you do not have to teach them to chase any more than you have to teach a kitten to chase. But catching something that doesn't want to be caught is a skill. And so I would drag a little fake mouse around on a string. And there's also an adaptation of a falconry technique to really get them in shape. And eventually, there was no choice about whether to keep or release her. She needed to be released. She needed to be an owl, not a bird in a cage, have a
Yeah.
shot at the future. But freedom is dangerous. So when we got around to leaving the door open, eventually, the time came where I was afraid she would maybe bolt and just disappear, or something worse would happen to her. And the first morning after we left the door open, I found a bunch of her feathers outside our back door. And I
Yeah.
thought, wow, she got killed in a few hours. This is absolutely the worst case. And then I thought, well, wait a second. I don't really know if she got killed. Maybe some blue jays attacked her and just pulled out some feathers. We don't really know what happened. But she was gone for about a week. We were leaving food out. It was not being taken. She was definitely gone. I thought maybe she is dead. I didn't know. It was a bit stressful. And then one night, Patricia, my wife, texted me saying, "Guess who's back?" She,
What a great picture. Look at that.
she came back. She was not starving. She was plump and in quite good shape, but she decided to stick around, centering her territory around our backyard. And as I said, we had quite a relationship going. The ability of this bird and lots of others, but really I saw it through the portal of this bird. The ability of this bird to have a bond and the recognition of us as individuals was really surprising to me. Even with all the experience I have had with birds, I was really surprised at this bird's ability to form a bond and to recognize who we are, to treat us differently than strangers, to treat our dogs very differently than strange dogs. And so that's how this was going. So now she's alive. She passed all of those hurdles. She's free living. We have this relationship going, and then a love triangle. Very soon after she was free flying, a suitor showed up. And here things got really interesting for me, because as a trained ornithologist, I learned that courtship involves certain behaviors, displays. A male will do a display or a song, a female will respond a certain way, and then they are a pair, and then they start breeding. That's what I learned, and that's what I thought I had seen in the past when I was studying wild birds. But here I wasn't studying wild birds. I was watching a bird I knew very, very well. And this was during the year 2020, when COVID erased all our calendars. And I was at home watching Alfie for about 5 hours a day, 2 or 3 hours in the morning, 2 or 3 hours in the evening, watching what was happening with them. And it was not just a stereotyped courtship one does one thing, the other does the other thing. Alfie and this bird were mutually very interested in each other, but also they didn't trust each other. They did a lot of chasing each other around. It wasn't clear to me at first whether it was hostile or friendly even. And then they started to settle down a bit. And I was seeing not just courtship, I was seeing the development of a relationship and the development of trust. When he started to offer her food, like he's offering her a moth in this picture, at first she didn't take it. Then she would take it sometimes. Then she took it all the time. Then they started perching right next to each other. Then she would come out of her day roost, fly to their rendezvous spot, start calling and looking forward with a lot of anticipation to his arrival. Then came the physical act of mating. Oh, wait, hang on a second. So another thing, before I get to the physical act of mating, another thing that I learned when I was in school learning how to be an ornithologist is that birds have no facial expression and you can't tell anything from just looking at them. Well, look at these two. That's her mate on the left. He's saying, you know, I don't like you and I've never liked you and I wish you would leave us alone. And Alfie there on the right is in love and she's completely relaxed with me. And you can simply see that in their posture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just look at his eyes. He's like, "Arr," you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So then the physical act of mating, Alfie was totally inexperienced, very awkward at first. I think we all remember those days. And then she got it right. She got comfortable with it. She started to act more like a grown-up, like an adult. It was so unbelievably interesting to watch all of this happen. We put up a nest box. They took it. The easiest way to make a nest box unavailable to squirrels, which are the main competitor for these things, is to stick it on the side of a house if you can. And this is my writing studio, and this was a really good place for it. They were checking out some other holes in some trees. When I put this box up, they took it right away. That's Patricia looking for her mate, not her mate, looking for Alfie's mate. I'm her mate.
You were in the
She's
studio.
looking for Alfie's mate. We named the mate +1, so it's Alfie and +1. And you can see Alfie is just very relaxed. How unusual it was to be able to watch essentially all the wild behavior at point blank range. Just gave me so many insights. I never wanted to bother her in the box, despite how relaxed she seemed to be. I wanted her to think that the box was a place that nobody could get to and was completely safe and inviolate. So I didn't go up there to see what was going on when Alfie started spending a lot of time in the box. But I realized that each evening around sundown, she would come out, take a bath, go and shake herself off, do a little spin cycle. And that gave me about 5 minutes to throw a ladder up, climb up there, stick my phone in the box, and see what was going on. And what was going on was she had indeed laid eggs. And you know, there are eggs all around us in all these nests all the time. We almost never see them. It's an incredible miracle. Eggs are a miraculous thing, and we usually don't get a glimpse of them. But here they were. And I was wondering, are they fertile? They hatched. To show you how small screech owls are when they hatch, that huddle of fuzz on the top, that's 3 baby screech owls compared to the size of a white-footed mouse that their father had caught.
Wow.
They were really tiny.
Huh.
When they were tiny, the parents brought a lot of small things to them. When they got bigger, parents started bringing bigger things like sparrows. And when they were growing their fastest, +1 started hunting in the middle of the day and catching chipmunks. If you had asked me, do owls hunt in the middle of the day? I would say no. And do they ever catch chipmunks? No. But the answer is no, except when they do. And he was responding to their need for the most food at their time of fastest growth by really becoming a super hunter.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Then, of course, came time to fledge. And again, I was just amazed at the relationality among these birds. They knew who they were. They knew they belonged together. It was a sticky little family. The first day out of the nest was a very difficult few hours. Blue jays found them,
Yeah.
started knocking the babies out of the trees, basically doing their best to try to kill them. None of the babies got hurt despite getting knocked repeatedly to the ground. I would have thought that once they were on the ground, they were totally helpless, but I was amazed to see they would walk to the nearest tree and climb up the trunk. They would walk up the trunk,
Wow.
get back up there.
Wish I could do that.
I know. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, that would be very convenient
So
if we
what is
could.
it with blue jays, Carl?
Blue jays, robins, all these birds, they hate owls because owls are dangerous to them at night. Owls will take their nestlings. Owls will kill adults sometimes. I found catbird feathers, and wren feathers and sparrow feathers in the nest. They are predators, and they look cute and they seem so adorable. But at night they rule the night, and in the daytime, the birds try to drive them out of their territory.
Yeah.
And that's a dynamic that has been going on with them for tens of millions of years, actually.
And
Yeah.
even squirrels, did I hear that you read that they actually take an animal larger than they are
Yeah.
by
They're called the
weight?
chipmunks. Yeah.
Well, chipmunks.
Well, these owls, chipmunks, these owls will not attack anything as big as a gray squirrel. Although the babies, when they started to get old enough to hunt, I saw them looking with great interest at the movements of these squirrels. But the squirrels are too big for them. Alfie turned out to be a totally competent mother. And we probably all have heard that the young compete and that the strongest young survive and the weaker ones starve and die. Well, this was the opposite of what I saw. What I saw was Alfie would feed one, and then she would feed another, not just the one who was begging the most, but she would go and if one of them was on a branch a few feet away, she'd fly to the one that had not been fed yet. It was very, very, very interesting to watch her seem to make sure that all of the young were fed. I wanted to name the young ones, but I couldn't tell them apart. So Patricia said, "Well, why don't we just give them a group name? We'll call the young ones the Who." So it was Alfie plus one and the Who in our backyard there for a few weeks before the young ones dispersed. This is a video. Turn your sound up. You're going to hear Alfie's word for love, and you're going to see what I mean by relationality. Here we go.
Hmm.
Yeah. And look how she leans into the pleasure of our shared touch. Humans and owls have not had a common ancestor for something like 200 or 300 million years. And yet the vertebrate nervous system was so set by then that we can still relate to each other. We can both get pleasure out of this contact. And I just found it so amazing. When she leaned into my touch, it's just like when I'm rubbing my dog's ears
Yeah.
and they just lean in like that. It's just really, really incredible. So all of this raised a really big question, which is why don't we know that we are in a world that is filled with these relational beings? Why do we know nothing about them? Is our disconnect a limitation of the human mind, or are we actually taught our disconnection? And to try to answer that question, I asked, well, what were other cultures taught about the human place in the world?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the book goes back and forth between Alfie and plus one and all this stuff that I just showed you, and what other cultures taught and what our culture taught from the time of the ancient Greeks when the West was just, beginning to be what Western thought and Western civilization became. So I'll stop the slides here.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Carl, one of the things I love the most about this book is that it's not just about you and Alfie and her family. You take that and run with it in a very, I think, important way to get others to see what you see that is so important. We've lost our way in a way that children are not natural killers. Children are naturally curious.
Mhm.
A little baby, a, a little kid who's just learning to walk, just learning to explore the world, given a chance, is not going to go boom if they see an insect or whatever it is. It's just open innocence and curiosity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's extremely true, and I think that all of us have probably seen that. I one of the things that we don't exactly see eye to eye on is that I go fishing. One of the things that I've noticed over the many decades of my life, going from a little boy whose father and uncles took him fishing to me taking little kids fishing, is when I was little, if you caught a fish, it went in the cooler. It was food. That was it. Nowadays, if I take young kids fishing, if we catch a fish, they often want to let it go.
yes, exactly. So did I.
So
Or do
so
I?
they're they're not, as you say, not natural killers. But the other thing about that natural curiosity that you mentioned is how many times have we seen a kid want to investigate something and their parents literally pulling them away, saying,
Oh,
"Don't touch."
yeah.
Oh, it's
Right.
dirty.
Dirty, it's
Right.
wet, it's
Yes, yuck.
it's
Right.
yucky.
Yeah. Whereas I think you all and I know that if you're not dirty, wet, and yucky, you're not learning much, right? Those are
No,
the most
no.
fun times.
No child left dry.
Or, yeah,
Exactly.
clean. So,
But here's the thing. When our numbers were small and nature was largely unscathed by our presence, and that's 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, even then, we were pretty successful predators, but we had to feed ourselves. I think there's evidence that we began cultivating things long before some of the current historians suggest that it's a relatively recent phenomenon. But however, it was natural to dine on our neighbors, if you will, because they seemed really abundant. They were really abundant, and our numbers were small. And it took until, I'll go back 500 years ago, there was still only, I say only, 500 million people.
Right.
And nature was still largely intact. We had just begun to take on the ocean with whaling in the 1500s, the 1600s, whales, for example, and fishing. We got increasingly good at capturing and killing wildlife. And we call that natural resources. They're free. They're free. And even now we have whole agencies, fisheries agencies, natural resource agencies that are really dedicated to using, taking from nature. Nature has a zero accounting base. It's free goods. And
yes.
so the whole idea that we look at nature as there for us to take and use and consume. And here's the thing, especially about fish. If you can't eat it or sell it, it's considered either underutilized or trash fish. What's with that? Do we have trash birds, underutilized birds, birds that we can't find an application for, so they're, you could just disregard them?
Well, I think that it is true that we in our culture tend to put a little more value on creatures with lungs. Birds have lungs, fish don't have lungs. But it's also true that there are a lot of birds that are considered pests and that are killed in huge numbers by people who work for government agencies. This agency called Wildlife Service.
Wildlife services. Ah,
They poison thousands and thousands of birds that are considered crop pests. I've
Correct.
seen, I went to a wildlife refuge up on Lake Ontario where we're visiting the wildlife refuge, and there's a tremendous stink coming out of the dumpster, and the dumpster was filled with cormorants
yeah.
that the personnel at this refuge shot because they compete with fishermen. So because they eat fish, right? So there's a case where the birds are valued even less than the fish, but the only thing that is really valued is how people use them. Now, on the other hand, I'm going to say that this is a peculiarly Western thing. Western meaning the European culture that we come from, that values the world at zero.
Yeah.
As I was having a related conversation with a friend, a fantastic wildlife photographer called Amy Gulick the other day, and she's done a lot of work in Alaska. And she said that one of the Alaskan natives said to her, "My people have always survived by killing animals, but we were always very careful not to take too much. We're always very respectful. We put the bones back. They treat everything with respect as relations. They consider life our relatives, which it is biologically. It's only our culture where we are taught that the world has no value. The valuation of things is an arbitrary thing. We could say the world is the most valuable thing there is, which scientifically that's true. But our culture tells us you can cut a forest or you can take tons of fish out and you don't pay anything for the emptiness you leave behind or the pollution you put into the world because the world has no value. If the world was valuable and the monetary system said you were going to have to pay for all that removal, all that destruction, well, everything would be different, but we don't say that. And another thing that, when we went to the Solomon Islands, we were traveling with Chris Anderson of the TED Talks and his wife, Jacqueline Novogratz. And I was talking to her recently, and she said something that I can't believe never occurred to me, but it's so deeply true. We talk about rights. We have a Bill of Rights. We have the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And all the nice people we know, we want everybody to have their rights. Never even occurs to us, why is there no Bill of Responsibilities? Why is there no UN Declaration of Responsibility? Rights is what we want to get. We don't even think, let alone teach, that we have responsibilities in the world. But many other cultures do teach that the world is a sacred place, that we have responsibilities in how we use things. And you were talking about the population of the world when there were 500 million people. There were about 1 billion people in 1800. By then, Malthus was already seeing the handwriting on the wall that he was afraid that there may be too many people coming up soon. Well, Sylvia, you are only 20 years older than I am, and in your lifetime, the human population of the world has quadrupled. The acceleration is so fast that in my lifetime, it more than tripled. So you and I both remember times when places just were a lot less crowded and there was vastly less pressure. There were many more wild places and many places that we knew have been bulldozed, dredged, channelized. Farms have expanded, and then the explosion of chemicals that were brand new when we were born, or non-existent when we were born, that drench the landscape and wash into the sea, creating these dead zones
And plastic.
and plastic. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Even more egregious, though, right now in the 21st century, armed with the knowledge of just what you're talking about. Earth is only so big. We are subsidizing the industrial extraction of ocean wildlife. I mean, the biggest wildlife trade on the planet is what we call seafood. And,
Well, yeah, that's another crazy thing about valuation. Not only do we say that they're worth nothing alive in the ocean, but if your operation cannot make a profit, we, the big capitalists, will pay you, will subsidize, will socialize your destruction.
It's
That's
nuts.
how we value the fish and the ocean so little that we will make all of the taxpayers pay to help destroy it.
only now there's another wrinkle, and that's called climate change. You are talking about hundreds of millions of tons of carbon actively being removed and subsidizing, paying people to remove it and disrupting the natural carbon capturing mechanisms in the ocean that are equivalent to what we understand and value with forests on the land. I mean, somehow the truth has to be all at once. You got to see what should be so obvious. What's with this? Maybe it's the climate change narrative that's going to get us to a point where we can get our heads on straight.
Maybe,
Oh.
but I thought, well, you remember in the 90s when we first started really hearing a lot about climate change, it was something in the future. And I thought, well, if it ever starts to happen to people, then finally there'll be no denying it because it'll be happening. Well, now we have all these intensified storms, we have all the wildfires, we have all the coastal flooding, we have the heat that is creating problems for crops. We're running out of water to for agriculture, and in some cases conflict over drinking water, certainly conflict over water for rivers versus farms. All of this stuff, it still hasn't convinced a lot of people who are just in total denial. And part of the reason for that denial is they're taught that the world has no value. And many of them are taught that it doesn't even matter if we destroy the world because God will make the new heaven and the new earth, and judgment day will come, and that's what it's supposed to be. Now that is a horrible, horrible narrative. I don't think any narrative can possibly be, quite frankly, more psychotic than the idea that destroying the world is okay.
Yeah.
But there are literally millions of people who that's what they've been taught, and they firmly believe it as a matter of faith.
So they can go to Mars.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's another thing. What are the ethics of taking the only species that has destroyed a planet and moving it to another planet?
Another planet.
And starting from scratch.
Let alone the logic that says that this world is dying, so the solution will be we'll go to a dead world. Well, it's a lot cheaper to just wait for this world to die if that's your thinking.
Yeah, no, but
I have no patience for any of this stuff. It's horrible. It's so really, honestly, I think some of the sickest thinking in the history of our species.
But Carl, one of the things I love about this book is you dive into some of these big thoughts interwoven with your story of Alfie and your relationship. And it's a deeply thoughtful, moving story, not just about you and your lover, but it's your love of nature, love of humankind, the concern about the future, and really, I think in your very entertaining and provocative way, just a plea for reason. Like, come on, wake up, look at the world.
and I think we are seeing, I mean, more and more people are starting to kind of wake up, but oftentimes they feel like so helpless and depressed about, what can I do? I'm this one person, I have my one little yard, or I have my apartment or whatever,
One little owl.
one little owl, but it's like, what can they do
Yeah.
to make a difference? And they, they decide they're going to eat less meat. They decide they're going to, plant wildflowers or rip out the lawn and do these things. But like, how do we like force multiply that to really give people a sense of that they can help turn things around?
They tell a good story, for one thing.
Well, I think, for one thing, just to go back one notch for what Sylvia was saying, when we read about these issues, or when we see, like last July, we couldn't see the sun for a few days in July. It's supposed to be a summer's day. That's like the nicest phrase in the English language, a summer's day. We couldn't see the sun. The sky was yellow. It was hard to breathe. I was worried about all these birds trying to feed their young ones all over our neighborhood and elsewhere. And then you read about the wider context, and you have a storm in your head and you feel like your head's going to explode.
Yeah.
And then come out and watch these little owls, and they've succeeded for tens of millions of years. There's life and death. There's killing and eating. It has never hurt the world. Their way of living has never hurt the world. The calmness and sanity of these birds, juxtaposed against the news of all the things that we are doing, really made such an impression on me that in a way, that's the basis of the dynamic tension in the pages of the book. It's exactly that. And especially in the time of COVID, it was that was the additional distressing thing. And then you come out and the owls are doing their thing, and it's so calm, and it all makes perfect sense.
Life goes on.
As far as being one person, everyone in the history of the world has been one person. The trick is to join other people. That's really the trick. So it's good to do what we can do ourselves in our own lives, but to really make a difference, once you have that posture of, I'm willing to be thoughtful, I'm willing to do some things I can do, but change happens at the level of policy, politics, the government, all these things that are really not that much fun for a lot of people, but that's where it happens. And, sometimes I tell people who are vegan, who might get very, very upset about the idea of having a slice of pizza with cheese on it, or an ice cream cone on a hot day, that, not having an ice cream cone, fine. But the important thing is, who did you vote for? Did you vote? That's what you do that affects the wider society. What groups are you part of? Where are you getting information that says, this thing is coming up for some sort of voter decision? Please write a letter. Who likes to write these letters? Nobody does. I don't know anybody, but it's really important that you do. It's more important than the things you only do that are only confined to your own home and your own life. You need to be engaged in society to help make a difference that matters in the wider world. So I think it's all of those things.
I think I feel obliged to tell kids how lucky they are to be 21st century kids. Despite all of the doom and gloom and the terrible situation, you can point in so many directions about woe is us, but imagine if we did not know what the problems are. Imagine if we did not have the insight that people could not have before. I mean, no one knew what the kids of today grow up with a capacity to know what Earth looks like from afar, that we know, or at least you can find out how many people now exist as compared to how many there were going back, whatever piece of time you want to aim for it. We have knowledge that, and I look at the wisdom of indigenous people who have come, like your friends you mentioned in the Arctic, that have a relationship with a place for a long period of time, that awareness of who you are within a space, but They could not know what was happening on the other side of the world. They could not know how everything is connected the way we now do, could not know about microbes, could not know that you could actually, even 1,000 years ago, illuminate large animals with handheld spears, that there
Mm,
were limits even then. But that knowledge that we now have is the best hope that we
yeah,
can kind of muddle our way through this amazing time of unprecedented change. I just I just have to keep focusing on, okay, but now we know. Now
yeah.
we so okay, we got all this.
Now
This
we
is our
do.
past. Here we are. Now we get it. We got climate change. We've lost maybe half of the big wild animals in the ocean, defaunation, not over 10,000 years, but in half a century.
Yeah,
We're
50
so
years.
good at killing
Yeah.
and eating and consuming, not even just eating, just consuming for products. And it's it's really depressing sometimes, but it's also I I'm really glad to be here at this time.
Well, we do really have the capacity to share knowledge, to share
And
stories.
I'm glad you did that.
We are the ones who know more than anybody ever before. And human problems have human solutions, and we know what the solutions could be to all of our problems. We don't have problems like probably centuries ago when people didn't know about microbes and there were plagues that were, I just found out I was in Italy recently, and I just learned for the first time that many of the waves of the plague that wiped out up to a third of the population of Europe. Now imagine, of everybody you know, 1 out of 3 dies, and you don't understand what's killing everybody or how it's transmitted. That the plague had actually um, mutated so that it could be airborne between people, like COVID is, but it was much, much more deadly. I always thought it was fleas that came
Yeah.
from rats. That started it, but then it mutated and it became transmissible in the air, person to person. And imagine everyone's dying around you and you don't understand what's making it happen. We don't have that now. We understand the problems. We are causing the biggest problems that the world has faced since there have been humans. But we understand now what the causes are, what the solutions could be, and what we need to do. We know all of those things.
Absolutely do.
So let's get with
Let's
it.
get on it. But it's a great,
Yeah. Anyway, just bravo, Carl, for articulating some of these thoughts in such a accessible way. And
Well, thank you. You're a master at that, and it's nice to hear those kind words from you. I don't know anybody who does that kind of thing better than you do. You are a master at communicating, and also, not being afraid of passion. Most of us, you have a PhD, I have a PhD. Most of us were taught at some level, either explicitly or implicitly, you're not supposed to be emotional about your subject. Well, how can you not be emotional when the whole point is loving the world? That's the whole point.
thank
yeah,
goodness
just,
Jane Goodall did not listen
yeah.
to those who scorned naming the chimpanzees that she studied.
Well, we've named a few fish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least we have.
You name some birds, It's so
We have some questions.
we do have some questions in the Q&A. Thanks everyone for putting your questions in, and please keep adding them. Scott says that anthropomorphism should be a scientific curriculum.
That's a good point, and that's one of my little pet hobby horses or bugaboos or whatever the word is. When I was in school, I was taught that um, animals, which humans, of course, are not animals. That's what we were taught. But
No.
animals are not aware of anything, and they have no thoughts, and they have no emotions. Well, that's completely not scientific. We all share the vertebrate nervous system. We have the same organs of perception and detection. We have the same hormones and brain neurochemicals that create mood and motivation. And what other animals do makes sense. If there's danger, they run away. If there's a need to attack, they attack. It all makes sense. So obviously they're perceiving things. They're making choices. When a creature makes a choice, they understand what's going on. I think you shouldn't project human thoughts and emotions onto other creatures, but you also should not have a rule that says other creatures have no thoughts and emotions, because the more that we learn, ever since, as you were saying, Sylvia, really ever since Jane Goodall, the more we've learned in now thousands of studies, the more we understand that other animals have thoughts and emotions. They make decisions. They form relationships. They have bonds. They have social structures. They know who they are, where they are, and they have lives and they have individual personalities. So we've learned all of that.
Oh.
And
He's gone to the shelf. Oh, no. Oh, good grief.
Yeah,
He's brought
there's
down.
Conrad Lorenz.
yes,
All right, sit back down.
Yeah.
More questions.
Oh, and then there's Donald Griffith.
oh, he really was a hero of mine.
Yeah, bats.
I'll tell you a funny story about him. I went to see him do a public lecture when I was in college. I went to see him do a public lecture, and his book at the time was called The Question of Animal Awareness. And he was scorned by the scientific community for having the nerve to say that other animals are simply aware. So he went through this thing for about an hour. And as I said, it was not an academic audience. It was a public audience. It was actually at IBM headquarters. So it was a lot of people who work for IBM and their families in the community. So he goes on for an hour, and then it's question and answer time. First question, somebody says, I don't understand what you've been talking about. I mean, you've gone on for an hour trying to tell us that animals are aware, but isn't that obvious to anybody who has a dog?
Oh, yeah. Mine has a lot of trouble with impulse control. You know? Oh,
It is
man.
obvious. Ask any child.
Yeah,
They're not burdened by these,
blinders.
yeah, whatever, the way you ought to think.
Yeah, you should. All right. Stephanie says, some people just seem to have a special connection with animals naturally. Aside from being taught or not taught the connection, why do you feel some people are more connected than others?
Well, I do think that I would say almost all of it is what you are taught or not taught. And then I would say that some of it is what you might call a talent. You know, some people are taught to play the piano, but some of those people have a special talent for it. And I think that there are some people who, if they are introduced to animals and nature and living things with the idea of being kind and being aware and being and valuing them, that they just really take it and run with it at a deeper level, or just can't even imagine a life that is not fully engaged with being outdoors or working with other animals or things like that. That was my case. I was a city kid. I lived in Brooklyn till I was 10 years old. There were about 3 wild animals in Brooklyn: rats, cats, and pigeons.
And
And
people.
for some reason, anything having to do with nature or other animals, or going to the zoo, going to the public aquarium, all these things that are so controversial now, going to the Museum of Natural History, all the animals had been killed for the dioramas there. But I found all of it totally compelling. All I wanted to do was grow up and have something to do with all of that stuff. That's just sort of like, I think it was like what you would call a talent, just an inclination, an inclination.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always had it.
Likewise, I can't imagine not having it. Kids have it naturally, but as soon as they
I have
start,
to let my dogs out. Hang on a second.
Oh boy, there he goes. Who let the dogs out, right? All right.
no, as soon as kids start to walk and
Okay, I'm back.
Very
Sorry.
good.
it's just saying that we rejoice when kids start to walk and talk, and then we tell them to sit down and be quiet.
Yes, isn't
yeah.
that funny? That's a wonderful observation.
Okay. Rhoda says it's not just the Western world that treats animals as disposable and free for the taking. China and Vietnam cruelty farm bears for their bile and eat dogs and cats. So I guess
Yeah.
I mean there are other cultures that really do consume a lot of wildlife and
Yeah, it's a little hard, it's a little confusing to me about what really is the what you might call, for lack of a much better way of talking about this and trying to do this quickly, what you might call the original cultures of China and Vietnam and places like that. Because if you look at the religions, if you look at Buddhism and you look at Confucianism, these philosophies that say that the humans have a special responsibility to not upset the balances in the world, um, and then you lay on top of that the capitalism that has swept the world and the profit motives that they've adopted. It's very hard for me to get what I think is an authentic signal about what really is their culture and how much of their culture is our culture that they got from us. I think that's it's a much bigger topic than we have time for.
yeah,
The
no, I agree.
globalization,
Yeah,
this lack of compassion, not just for animals, for nature, it's for one another.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Somehow have hardened the things that we think of as being humane.
Yeah, empathy.
Empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. It's
Yeah.
there in kids, curiosity, and you have to learn the joy of killing. But it's globalized. I don't think you can name any one culture that has a lock on that.
Yeah.
So Patricia says, Carl, how can we make people see and understand that we're responsible for ocean wildlife? How much more do we need? In which direction to make people catch this idea that we're part of nature and try to stop all the destruction?
I did not ask that question. I
If
mean,
we if we knew the answer to that and there was one good answer, we would all be doing that. I think it's a couple of things. One is I if you can take young children outside and connect them with that kind of reality and give them that kind of guidance and open things up for them, it goes very, very far.
yeah.
But not everybody can do that, and many people don't have parents that are inclined to do that, and so it has to do with what values your value system teaches. Where do we get our values from? And we get our values almost entirely from the religions we're raised with and from the economy, and we use the Western economy that was invented in Europe, and that really came from a Christian tradition that says that nature has no value, and it reflects that. So I think it's those things that, the Catholic Pope, the Orthodox Greek patriarch, and a few other people, even some of the evangelical Christians, have this idea of creation care. And if you can teach care and respect as a matter of faith to counteract the opposite teaching of faith that you shouldn't bother having any care or respect for the world or for what lives here with us, that would be the game changer, I think.
Kind
Make it cool to care.
of more of a stewardship approach.
Yeah.
Even fashionable to care.
Yeah.
Right now it's cool to kill.
Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, this is sort of a long one from Randy. I'm going to read and listen to Alfie and Me in the new year.
Mhm.
Do any of your books similarly deal with the philosophical connections and disconnections discussed that you're talking about in this presentation? I'm intrigued by the prospect of bringing worldviews to other cultures and philosophies. Which of your other books should I buy to further
All of them.
explore these themes and concepts? Where's that stack?
Well, I mean, this one obviously represents I would say my most developed, or at least my current state of thinking about it. And the other one that talks about philosophy and the relationship that people have had with the living world is called The View from Lazy Point. The View from Lazy
Yeah,
Point.
it's over here.
Here's it.
That's a good one. Sylvia's been to Lazy Point, actually.
Yeah, I think you
Yeah.
promised her a no fishing trip there.
We had a little abbreviated no fishing trip, but the weather was bad, so we didn't stay out there. Oh, you look, you even have the view from Lazy Point. That's fantastic.
Did.
And I have the one about
Oh, wait,
the oil spill.
wait, we're gonna get through the questions. It's question time. Okay, how can we unite the younger generations with the older generation with the knowledge that we have now, as opposed to generational blaming of one another?
That's quite a question, really, because, I would say, well, those of us who have been through all of this stuff and have seen all these changes in our life, we are good guides, and yet and yet my generation is responsible for most of this destruction that I abhor, that you and Sylvia spend so much of your time trying to help counteract. I think the only generation that is not to blame for anything are the people who are not born yet, because once we get here and we take part in this culture, we are all part of the problem to a certain extent, and we can be part of the solution to a certain extent. But I think, as I say, I think just trying to work, not work, trying to take little kids um, and young people outdoors and showing them what it means to love the world, not to tell them about climate change and destruction and extinction and all these problems. You'll get that. What you won't necessarily get is what it means to really just love the miracle of life on this planet.
Yeah. I had an experience with a local artist who'd done a painting of some oyster catchers. And he was really thrilled with the way the painting came out, but he'd never seen a live oyster catcher. So he'd take him out and show him where they were, and he was like just blown away, He'd only seen them in photographs. It's amazing. All right, Miles says, Carl, you've shown that raising wild animals is transformative for how we understand and relate to them. Should we, if properly trained, be keeping more rescued wildlife, even as pets?
I don't think wild animals need to be pets or should be pets. I think it's almost always a lot worse for them.
Mhm.
How you think of as worse. I mean, it's a lot safer for them, but it's a dead end. Being a pet is a dead end. They don't have a shot at the future. They will never be able to procreate or just do the things that psychologically and emotionally they are geared to do. So I think it's very good. I often say I think it's really good for people who want to be very involved with animals to try to find a rehabilitator or a rehabilitation center to work with, because
Yeah.
you get a lot of hands-on, you get a lot of insights. Many of them can be released eventually to go back to their lives, and I think that's best case.
What happened with a skunk in
Oh
our
yeah,
backyard?
I had the baby skunk that I rescued. I had to call up and say, "Can I put the skunk in the back of the car? Is that okay?" It
But
was
of
great.
course,
But yeah, little skunky got rehabilitated and released just here locally, and
Uh-huh.
it was kind of watch for him,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I was giving a talk in a big tent one time on Cape Cod, and it was a Sea Education Association dinner. And I had just gotten up to the podium. I just started my talk. I was about 10 seconds in, and everybody, about 300 people, got up from their tables and started running out of the tent. Far enough into the talk to know that this was what I was saying. And I looked over to my right, and a little skunk had just wandered into the tent.
Oh my Lord.
I laughed my head off. I thought that was so fantastic.
They're such wonderful animals, and they give you such fair warning. They like stomp their little feet and they, pick up their
Yeah.
tail. So all you have to do is just like back off and they're fine. They're not going to get you.
I love that little skunk must have felt the power.
Yeah. Hey, watch this. Watch this, Okay, let's see here. That's not a good, let's see. William says animal behaviorists and ethnologists have known this practically forever. Indigenous cultures talk of brother bear. It was really funny to see Sylvia dragging out one of my heroes from the shelf, Conrad Lorenz.
Yeah.
Indigenous people have talked about other living things as their relatives for a very long time. That's especially true for the ones we know better, the North American indigenous
Yeah.
people. But
Cody,
this
Haven.
seems to be true, you know, in Australia and across almost all of the traditional land-based indigenous cultures. They intuit their relationship with other living things. It's pretty obvious, and it turns out that, you know, it took Western culture until around 1850 for somebody to say we are all biologically related. We are all actually kin in the history of life on Earth, and there are still millions of people who refuse to believe that.
Right.
I can't think of anything that feels nicer than the idea that we are all related. I don't understand why this upsets anybody in the least. What are you afraid of?
Mhm.
You know, it's just it's kooky to me. But other cultures intuited something deeply true that our culture took a very long time to get around to saying, and is still in some, you know, important pockets, it's very resistant to the idea. It's just
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah. Okay. Jenny is saying, how can we best achieve on a global level and capitalist culture to unlearn the disconnection from nature after so many years of living in the detached system?
Well, believe it or not, I think we are in the process of reconnecting. The problem is it's too slow, too long, too torturous. It shouldn't be a controversial thing. But the environmental movement is the process of reconnecting. When I was a kid, before the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, all of that stuff, I mean, we wiped out species without thinking that that was a bad thing to do.
Mhm.
Rivers were so dirty that in a number of cases, rivers caught fire. They
Yeah.
were just considered open dumps,
Right.
open chemical dumps and sewers. The air hurt to breathe in the big cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. It's different now. It's a big difference now. It's not nearly enough. A lot of problems that are different have intensified, and we, you know, like we didn't know about climate change when the Clean Air Act was being written. There are new problems, but
And
the environmental movement is the awareness of the need to reconnect. It's just that it's
and
a work in progress.
the ocean, the idea that we have taken essentially half of the big wild animals in my lifetime, less than that. It's the marketing of wildlife. It's the ability to find, capture, and sell them, and not just as something to wind up on your plate.
Yeah.
Just grind them up as products. It
Yeah.
just and to subsidize that to me is one of the the big breakthroughs we just have to make if we're going to if we're go going to make this change to look
Yeah.
at ocean life with different eyes as wildlife.
Actually, a lot of the most destructive things we're doing are not profitable on their own.
No.
And and we claim that we're all about capitalism, but we socialize this destruction, the destruction of unprofitable industrial fishing, unprofitable energy, for God's sake, extraction, unprofitable use of pesticides, and
Culture.
chemicals, and you know, but the farming, the energy sector, and the fishing sector are so heavily subsidized. We can't get health insurance like a civilized country, you know, but we subsidize the most destructive things.
Absolutely. So I
So
guess that's our
challenge.
our challenge, our New Year's resolution is to, speak up, write those letters that we don't like to write and vote and take a kid out in nature.
And
Mhm.
look, what's your next one, Carl? What are you working on?
I don't know yet. I'm just going to say I'm glancing at the chat. I want to say hello to Scott, and that's a very nice comment. I'm not writing a new book yet because this book has kept me very, very busy. I have some big travel coming up for most of the month of January. After that, there's an academic paper that I want to write, that has to do with an aspect of evolution I've been interested in, and I have a list of probably 24 books I'd like to write if I can live to be 800 or 900 years old. On that list, there are a couple of good ideas, and sometime in the next few months, I'll probably be into a new project like that.
And then we'll have to have you back again.
Well, you don't wait until
Yeah,
then.
no, not till
anytime.
then, anytime.
Anytime, anytime.
We are a little past the top of the hour, so, you know, be respectful of your time, let you go feed
Yeah.
those dogs.
Okay.
But
That's
before
great.
we go, Sylvia and I would like to say thank you so much, Carl, and thank you, Ocean Elders, for producing the show. And thank you to everyone out in the community who show up and participate in these conversations. Water connects us all, and we're ever grateful for your participation. And we will be back in 2024.
For sure.
And until then, remember, take care of the ocean.
As if your life depends on it, because
It does.
It does. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.